A nurse who worked at a hospital in Chester has been found guilty of murdering babies in her care.
Lucy Letby, a nurse responsible for looking after the sickest of newborns. Instead, she set about killing them.
After 2 trials, Lucy Letby was convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others.
Letby, who had denied all the charges, is the most prolific child killer in the UK in modern times.
She was found to have deliberately injected babies with air, force-fed milk to others, and poisoned 2 of the infants with insulin.
You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies.
But since her trial, a growing number of experts have voiced concerns.
There is a degree of certainty presented in the case that is in no way justified by the level of uncertainty that we know about in neonatal physiology.
Raising questions about how the courts grapple with cases of such medical complexity.
The jury were presented with thousands of pages of medical evidence in respect of each child, tens and thousands of pages of really complicated, difficult evidence.
These questions aren't from the corners of the internet. They're from specialists in the fields of medicine, statistics and science. In this programme, File on 4 examines some of the most contentious medical evidence in the case and interrogates the use of expert witnesses in the Lucy Letby trial.
I'm devastated for the families. There's absolutely nothing worse than losing your precious baby, and they've been told that the baby was murdered by Lucy Letby, which is awful. But, my job is to tell the truth about what I think has happened.
Can you get your ID, please, ladies?
We're here to deliver a letter to our Prime Minister Keir Starmer. As former nurses, on behalf of the nurses who can't be here today because they're afraid of being identified, and part of the campaign in support of Lucy, questioning the evidence that's been used in court against her.
These retired nurses believe Lucy Letby could be innocent, that the woman described as Britain's most prolific child serial killer, after one of the longest trials in British criminal history, could be the victim of a miscarriage of justice.
They'll knock on the door and someone will come out.
Right, okay.
Depending on what they've allowed you to do in photos.
Nurses are now speaking out and they are frightened. They feel they've lost their voice. They feel that they are no longer the patient advocate. They feel that they have no duty of candour. And that is important, that they are able to speak out and raise concerns.
They're delivering a letter to Downing Street, calling for a review of the case. It's been signed by 280 medical professionals. That's only a fraction of the NHS workforce, but it includes nurses, doctors, consultants, and hospital managers. They're not alone. At her first trial in 2023, Letby was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and trying to kill 6 others. Back then, a small number of people voiced concerns online about the prosecution's evidence. But when that trial and a subsequent retrial ended and reporting restrictions were lifted, questions about the safety of Letby's convictions multiplied. There was the Conservative MP, Sir David Davis.
I started off thinking she was guilty. It was only the fact that I got authoritative calls from people who really know about statistics, about medicine, about science. And I'd never had anything like this happen before.
And Peter Green, a professor of statistics and a former president of the Royal Statistical Society.
The problem is that humans are very good at seeing patterns when they're not really there.
This growing number of voices casting doubt on the safety of Letby's convictions has been upsetting for the families of the babies involved. The Thirlwall inquiry is looking at what could have been done to stop Letby. And at its opening last month, Lady Justice Thirlwall was scathing of those questioning the verdict.
There has been a huge outpouring of comment from a variety of quarters on the validity of the convictions. So far as I'm aware, it has come entirely from people who were not at the trial. All of this noise has caused enormous additional distress to the parents who have already suffered far too much.
Paediatrician Dr. Dowie Evans was involved in the case from the start. He worked with police throughout their investigation, and he was the prosecution's key expert witness.
I'm very, very disappointed with the reaction and the fallout following the verdict. I'm talking about people who have had no access to the clinical notes, were not present at the trial, have not seen the witness statements, have not heard from the parents, and yet there are people out there who are challenging the verdict, and I think they have been grossly irresponsible. The disregard that the so-called experts have had for these families is quite frankly disgraceful.
Many of the parents of these babies sat through the trial, and like the jury, they heard a case that left them in no doubt that Letby was guilty. There was a lot of evidence against her. It was all circumstantial. No one saw Letby commit a crime, and there was no forensic evidence. And that has only fueled questions around the case.
Circumstantial cases can be extremely strong and convincing. There are a combination of different factors, of different circumstances, which, when you put them all together, built a case.
Gudrun Young, KC, is a barrister specialising in criminal defence. She wasn't involved in the trial, but she's taken a keen interest in the case.
There's a danger in a circumstantial case of adding lots of different things together, which in and of themselves are actually quite evidentially weak, and falling into the trap, which the jury were warned against in this case. But nonetheless, there is this danger of falling into the trap of thinking, well, lots of bits of weak evidence, you layer them on top of each other and you form a certain conclusion. But in fact, those planks aren't in and of themselves evidentially sound. The way I often put it to a jury in a speech is, well, you might get 8 pieces of evidence, but if in and of themselves each one of them is really weak, 8 times 0 is 0. It's not 8.
4 senior judges rejected Letby's appeal following her first trial. And at a retrial in June and July, on account the first jury couldn't reach a verdict on, she was found guilty of attempting to murder another baby. She was handed a 15th whole life order, meaning she'll die in prison. But this did nothing to silence the dissenting voices. In fact, they grew louder. A group of neonatal and statistics experts sent a letter to the government asking for the Thirlwall inquiry to be postponed until concerns had been investigated.
While we acknowledge the gravity of the convictions against Miss Letby, our focus is on the broader implications for patient safety, healthcare management, and the potential for miscarriages of justice in complex medical cases. We believe that legal systems are particularly vulnerable to errors when dealing with intricate scientific evidence, especially in cases involving statistical anomalies in healthcare settings and the complex physiology of neonates.
24 experts signed this letter. They included Dr. Svelena Dimitrova, a specialist neonatal advisor to the Care Quality Commission, Dr. Tariq Ali, the former head of paediatric critical care at Oxford University Hospital, and Jane Hutton, a professor of medical statistics at the University of Warwick. Professor Hutton questions the backbone of the prosecution's case. They produced a chart that showed Letby was the only nurse on duty every time something terrible happened.
So the most important thing that isn't there is all the other deaths. If you want to find out what went wrong, I think you need to consider all deaths, not just a subset of them. And if we don't know what went wrong, we've got limited chance of putting it right.
What is it about this case that makes statistics so important?
We're clear there were deaths. We don't actually know whether or not there was murder. There might well have been, there might well not have been. We don't know. And that's why it's essential that you carefully consider the alternative explanations and the probabilities of different causes of death.
In the years up to 2015, the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester had between 1 and 3 deaths a year. Then, between June 2015 and June 2016, there was a cluster of deaths. 13 babies died. We know that some of those deaths were referred to a coroner. Among them, 6 of the 7 babies Letby was later found guilty of murdering. The coroner said they died of natural causes. But by early 2016, the consultants running the unit were already suspicious of Letby. Doctors had started to refer to her as Nurse Death. Eventually, the police were brought in.
The police will only be involved if they're told, we think there is a murderer. In other words, they have to make an assumption that a crime is present. It's very easy to get confirmation bias. If you think this has been caused by X, and so you know whether or not that person was present, it's very easy to see things that aren't otherwise there.